think it's possible for me to take. I don't think it's possible for me to take you through the entirety of the report within the limited time that we have. But I think it's important for me to just give you a bit of information behind the research that we're conducting. So my mandate when I was assigned with this particular task was to look at the state of peace in Zimbabwe, reflecting on the state of peace in Zimbabwe in 2022. The approach I took when I was doing the research was to, first of all, just reflect on the usual research that you do if you're looking at the issues to do with peace. You probably look at the processes, you probably look at how people interact within society. And then I realized when I was doing this research that one of the blind spots that we have missed over the years has been our we've fallen into the temptation of just looking at legal research when it comes to dealing with human rights, even dealing with peace. So we always look at a state-centric approach where we look at, do we have the right statutes? Do we have the right instruments? Do we have the right institutions to promote and to guarantee peace? And we fail to take into account one of the critical aspects of how the law relates with individuals, which is to look at it from a people-centered approach. So once we shifted that approach to looking at the people in line with Zimri's strategy, which is shifting power to the people, where we're trying to adopt a people-centered approach to human rights, you start to question whether, why is it, even though we have a constitution that guarantees various aspects of personal security, and why is it that even though we have all the institutions that mimic any other democracy, a liberal democracy that you can find in the world, we have the police force, we have the judiciary, institutions that seem functional on face value. Why is it that people still feel insecure in this particular country? So to answer that question, it was important for us to go back to the committees, ask them this particular question to say, do you feel secure in your own country? And what are the issues that make you feel insecure? So this was part of this, was the critical aspect of the research. And through Zimri's vast membership of over 200,000 members, we're able to reach out to Zimbabweans of all walks of life from all corners of Zimbabwe to ask them this critical question and to engage with them in this particular discussion. And what came out from that discussion was quite interesting. We realized that sometimes the civil society might have misdiagnosed the problem. Whenever we talk about, tomorrow we're going to have elections. Whenever we're going just before the elections, we always try to come up with a theory of change that sort of assumes that, first of all, the people lack rights literacy, the people lack voter education. So we need to go to the communities to tell them that your vote is a secret. No one is going to see you in the ballot box. There are no cameras in the voting booth. All those issues, we've tried to do that, and we try to also teach them that in terms of the constitution of political rights, which include the right for you to choose a political party of your choice. All of that we have done that in the past. But I think the blind spot which we are trying to address in this particular report, and which we have highlighted in the policy brief, is to look at why is it that when all the other ingredients that we think are necessary for citizens to exercise their fundamental rights, they still fail to exercise those fundamental rights. And from our analysis, that all boils down to the issue of personal security. And by personal security, we are defining it quite broadly. We're not only looking at personal security in the sense of protection from torture, from physical harm, but we're also looking at personal security as a vast concept to look at all aspects of what makes you a human being, all aspects of well-being. This includes your livelihood, this includes your economic security, this includes your social security. And once we start unpacking and looking at it through that intersectional lens, we start to see how vulnerable our people are. I'll just try to give you an anecdotal evidence of what I'm trying to say by looking at a simple individual, hypothetically a particular individual who stays in one of the informal settlements that we have in Zimbabwe. Pick any one of them if you want, whichever one that comes to your mind. And this particular individual is part of the over 89 or 90% of Zimbabweans who are informally employed. So they're probably vending or trying to do some other business on their own. And this particular individual does their business, probably they are vending and they're trading somewhere. Let's say in Mbare Musika, where we have Pedzanamo as a formal market. If you approach that particular individual and you teach them about their rights, their political rights, and then you ask them to go and exercise their fundamental freedoms, for them to exercise their freedoms of association assembly, to tell, if you don't want to attend a particular rally or political meeting, you have a right to say no. If you don't want to support a particular political party, you have a right to say no, and you have a right to show your political allegiance to any political party that you want. This is all clear and good. But if you zoom into this particular individual that you're looking at, you realize that various aspects of their life, stick out in terms of their personal security. For instance, wherever they are staying in an informal settlement where they have no property rights. So they have no ownership over the land on which they stay. They usually stay there at the benevolence of the ruling party. So it means that once in a while they have to go and show their allegiance to the ruling party in order for them to ensure that they continue staying on the land which they're staying. If you look at where they are trading, where their source of livelihood, for them to be able to have a vending store at Mbare Musika, they need to go and pay protection fees to the various political parties that are coming in, mostly ruling party supporters who are the ones who have taken over these vending spaces and politicized them, such that the only way you can be able to trade is for you to be a card-carrying member of ZANU-PF. So at the end of the day, if you follow this trail of insecurity right down to the individual, you realize that the individual lives within a state of perpetual insecurity. And that state of perpetual insecurity is one of the fundamental deterrents that is stopping individual citizens from being able to exercise their fundamental freedoms. So once we highlight this particular issue, realize that my task here is not for you to go through the entire report. As I've said, it's almost impossible. But it's for us to try, for me to highlight some of the recommendations that we make in this particular policy brief that are gleaned from that comprehensive report that looks at so many aspects of the lives of individuals in Zimbabwe. You realize that the recommendations seem to be a laundry list of issues that are all diverse and touch on so many aspects of issues that we are working on. They look at issues to do with issues that are inherently categorized as human rights issues, because as Zimbabweans, we have managed to come up with a way of putting things in categories, in silos. Neatly, we pack everything to say, this is human rights issues, this is livelihoods, these are peace-building issues, of which this particular report tries to break those silos to show you that everything is interconnected. As diverse as we are on this particular phone call and as diverse as civil society is in Zimbabwe, we need to be able to come at a common position, to be able to confront this fear, for us to be able to dismantle this state of personal insecurity. It requires us to have a concerted effort which looks at all those different aspects. If we try to do it piecemeal, we will not succeed. If we try to only rely on rights awareness, rights advocacy, it will not work without livelihoods. It will not work without addressing the endemic poverty that is in our communities, in our countries. It will not work until we address the economic insecurity arising from the lack of property rights that is there in the rural areas where communal land is vested in the president, and the villagers have no right to land whatsoever. And you can see how with the effect this has had when the mining companies are coming into these communities and they are marauding and going through all over the land. And the villagers have nothing to do. There's nothing to say. There's no response to what is going on. So it is a rally call for everyone who is working in any aspect of this, in any of these fields which I have hinted to, human rights, peace building, livelihoods, development. We all need to come together and come up with a common strategy that is aimed at creating an environment where citizens feel secure enough, and by secure, I mean in all aspects of their personal security. Once they are secure enough, they will be able to exercise their fundamental rights freely. And once that is in place, that's the only time where we can talk about having sustainable peace in Zimbabwe. So for the sake of time, I will not waste more time. What I'll try and highlight to you is we have a number of recommendations. We try to limit them to 10, but they can go on and on. Like I've said, you can already see, if you just apply the kind of lens that I've just described for you, you can already see so many aspects that we can include in our discussions that we might have left out. So we have the usual discussions that we have had if you're talking about governance, human rights issues to do with dismantling laws that are there that are threat to personal security. Laws that have been abused and used to try and stifle civic space in Zimbabwe. Laws like the Maintenance of Peace and Order Act, the recently enacted Patriotic Act, all those acts are clearly and glaringly in the space when you talk about civic space. But we also have other laws that might not necessarily have been looked at as impediments to the exercise of fundamental freedoms, but they are impediments to exercise of fundamental freedoms, like issues to do with the Communal Land Act, which I've hinted about, the Mines and Minerals Act. If you look at those aspects, we have civil society already that is working on those issues. But when they look at them, they're looking at them through probably around issues to do with development, issues to do with protection of the environment. But if you look at it and you draw it together within this broad discussion around personal security, you see that they have serious implications in terms of the personal security of citizens in Zimbabwe. And we also have recommendations around the rule of law and judicial independence. I think these are issues that we are all aware of. The need for us to be able to ensure that the judiciary and the judicial officers are able to come up with decisions freely on their own. Because remember, they are also citizens. So we also want to look at the personal security of judicial officers. What has happened to judicial officers who have come up with judgments that have gone against the government or that are deemed to be hostile towards the government? Whatever happens to those particular judges is a chilling effect on other judges and other judicial officers. So we cannot ignore that. We need to look at the personal security of the judges themselves as a critical aspect of us talking about rule of law and judicial independence. So we have a rundown of different recommendations, and you see that in this policy brief, we try to do something interesting where we try to create a distinction between policy reforms and behavioral changes. The reason why we did that was to try and highlight the fact that it is not enough for us just to reform the laws and the policies, but also have problems where instances where the law seems well and good, but the practice is just in violation of the law itself, or the practice itself does not comply with the laws themselves. Or in some instances, we just have practices that are meant to actually mitigate or to actually limit the effect of what the law is supposed to achieve. So you will see that we try to highlight that in each and every one of those recommendations that are there. We also have a recommendation around the reform of security sector institutions. It is a critical aspect of personal security as well as a critical aspect of peace in Zimbabwe. Because for me to know that I am safe in my own house, to know that I'm safe in this particular country, there is a particular institution which is called the State Security Services, and they are there to enforce the law. They are there to make sure that all citizens are safe from each other as well as from the state and from any other person who's willing to violate their personal security. But once that institution is compromised, you have a situation that citizens become vulnerable, and the way the security system is compromised is where when it's captured politically, and you have instances of selective application of the law. And once that happens, it erodes into the civic trust. We cannot trust the state institutions, that's one, but we can also not trust each other. Because the moment I identify as an affiliate of the ruling party, it places me at a pedestal, and I'm more equal than you. You have less rights than me. There are things that I can do and I can get away with that you can't do. And once that happens, it creates a serious state of insecurity for citizens, where we have some citizens going around bragging that they can violate rights and go away scot-free. So the culture of impunity that you have had over the years, for those that are working on transitional justice issues, they still remain quite critical even in 2023. We have people and communities that have been violated and they become perennial victims of violations since 2008, since the early 2000s, even in the 1980s, communities that have been violated. And these people who violated the rights of the people in these communities have not been held to account. So it sends a clear message to communities, to victims, that they are insecure. They have no security, they have no protection. And that is one of the contributory factors that forces these people, that restricts these people from exercising their fundamental rights, that restricts them from freely expressing themselves the way we expect them to do tomorrow when they're supposed to cast their ballots. We have also recommendations around media freedom and access to information. This includes policy reforms as well as behavioral changes, economic development and inclusive growth. You'll see that we are trying to highlight how these issues linked with each other. We highlight the issue to do with youth empowerment and employment opportunities, and we really zero in on how the disenfranchisement and the deliberate disempowerment of the youth creates a pool of human resources that are available for manipulation for political ends. Are easy to manipulate. These are the ones who are they're intoxicated. You buy them a couple of beers, and they are used to perpetrate violence in the various communities. So our argument is, in a way of trying to avoid to preserve peace and to avoid political violence, one of the sustainable ways of doing so is to really zero in on youth empowerment and employment opportunities. because we are aware that once the youth are economically empowered, are empowered in all aspects of life, then they are able to exercise their fundamental rights, and they are able to decide on their own what they want to do. But as long as they are stuck in this poverty cycle, they are vulnerable. And that vulnerability is one of the major challenges. It's a danger, and it will continue to be a challenge for us going forward unless it is addressed. Then the recommendations we have is political dialogue and inclusivity. We highlight this particular issue, and we also emphasize the fact that this political dialogue needs to be convened within the national structures. It needs to be a national dialogue. It cannot be a dialogue that is initiated by one political party. It cannot be a dialogue that is initiated by a particular politician. It has to be structured. It needs to be ingrained within the national systems. It must take the agenda from the people in terms of issues that need to be discussed. It must go beyond just talking about the usual political issues. It must go on to address social, economic, national issues. Sit down and try to deliberate among the different political players, the different stakeholders, including civil society, around how do we resolve some of the challenges that we are facing in the country. That is a critical issue that we highlight as one of the recommendations. We also highlight the need of opening of civic space. As we have said, civil society plays a critical role in terms of empowering citizens and creating neutral spaces for citizens to be able to express themselves, for them to be able to associate, for them to be able to assemble, and to be able to speak out against things that they feel like are being done wrong in their communities. And we also have as a ninth recommendation, civic education and community engagement. From our engagement with the communities, we realize that the work that all of us are doing in our different sectors, providing rights awareness, providing conflict prevention, conflict resolution training, all the work that we are doing is actually helping communities, because we've got positive feedback to say this is quite critical. It helps communities to understand and to be able to see what is lacking within their communities and to be able to aspire for something better than what they have right now. And lastly, the last recommendation we have is around strengthening independent and credible peace-building institutions. By peace-building institutions, we are not only restricting ourselves to the NPRC, whose mandate is going to come at an end very soon, but we are looking around all the institutions that are there in government and the role that they have to play in terms of fostering peace in our communities. They need to be strengthened. They need to be capacitated for them to deliver. That means giving them adequate resources, but they also need to have their independence and integrity protected. Because once these are compromised, this will erode the rule of law. This will also have a detrimental effect on civic trust, as I have highlighted before. And finally, you will see we have a number of calls that we have for you. We have a call for the government around the main call to the government is the government needs to walk the talk. We have so much rhetoric around peace. All these speeches, if you open them, there's always something about peace. Every politician is calling upon people to vote peacefully. Everyone is calling for people to be peaceful. But are we walking the talk? Are we really doing something to make sure that this is realized? It's one thing for us to preach peace and then practice something completely different. So this is one of the main calls that we have for the government. We have a critical call for whoever is going to be part of the government, for them to transition from partisan interests into state interests once they come into power. Our major problem, a major weakness, which is alleged in the report, is that we have a situation whereby the state is virtually non-existent. In its place, the party still continues. So once the party becomes the state, you have a situation whereby the personal security of citizens is not guaranteed. You see in the report where we make a link between political affiliation and the levels of personal security risks. This is really because the state is virtually non-existent. It is just an appendage or an extension of the ruling party. And once that is the case, then citizens are vulnerable, particularly dissenting voices that speak against the interests of that particular party. And for civil society, the main call that you are making is we need to close ranks. We need to stop working in silos. We need to stop looking at this particular issue through a myopic view or through a piecemeal approach where we're just focusing on the issues that are directly linked to what we are doing. Because whether you're working on media freedoms, whether you're working on children's rights, whether you're working on women's rights, whether you're working on political rights, whether you're working on governance, whether you're working on development, all those issues are interconnected. Because at the heart of everything, like what you have just discussed, the personal security understood in its different aspects is a bearing on the attainment of whatever goals that you're trying to do. So it calls for us to have a concerted effort to come together and try to address this problem through a holistic and systemic solution. that really goes down to address the roots of the issues that we're trying to contend with. And lastly, the report also has a recommendation for citizens. Unfortunately, the only way to break the cycle of fear and the cycle of the lack of personal security is for citizens to confront the fear head on. The citizens have to, at some point, come together and be able to express themselves despite the political hindrances that are there. This calls for citizens to have a concerted effort whereby we are trying to create a neutral space for citizens to be able to say, if we have no roads in our community, we don't care which political party you are supporting, but the lack of roads in our community affects all of us. So the call from the community would be, we need roads. Whoever can deliver roads, whoever can deliver what the community wants is the one that we want to be leading us as a community. I think this ties into the work that Zimrise has been doing with the People's Human Rights Manifesto. I think some of you are aware of it, where the Human Rights Manifesto tries to articulate a set of demands from citizens that really speak to what citizens expect from their own government. So this is what we're trying to call for. We're trying to call for a shift of political power back to the citizens, for citizens to be able to realize that we are only insecure when we are ununited. We are not when we are divided. But when we are united, our personal security threats become less because it's difficult for them to target all of us at once. But once we isolate ourselves and we divide ourselves along political party lines, this is why this state of personal security, of personal insecurity is perpetuating in Zimbabwe. I've tried to summarize everything in a few minutes. I'm very sorry if I spoke very fast, but I had very limited time. The only thing that I would say before I leave the floor is that throughout the work that we have done, through the report, through the policy brief, we are trying to dismantle the old messaging that we have had, where we've defined peace simply as the absence of the colonial regime, where we have said now we are in a peace environment because we're no longer in the racist colonial regime. We are no longer experiencing the direct violence which characterized the liberation struggle. We are defining peace beyond a static definition of peace, and we want a more dynamic definition of peace. And we want citizens to ask those in power to say, is this the best we can do? Is this the best that we can have as peace in our country? We want peace that is positive, that includes social justice, that includes equitable distribution of resources, that highlights personal security, and ultimately allows and guarantees the free exercise of fundamental freedoms. I think those will be my few remarks. I'm sorry for taking up too much time, Zikamai.
Thank you very much, Tafadzwa, for unpacking the report. So now the report is out there, and its 10 key findings are now before us. The link with the report has been shared in the chat, and the actual findings are on page 11. We will be coming back to you there, Tafadzwa. I want to invite our other panelists to plug in and discuss the findings of this report, particularly with a focus of the context in which we are in. And the report brings to the fore, I think, a key issue around apathy when it comes to democratic processes. Earlier on, Zimrise produced a guide to elections and democracy, looking at participation, and this was in preparation for these particular elections. And one of the obstacles to participation that is raised in that guide is fear. So this report does unpack that issue of fear as part of the dynamic of apathy. So I want to invite Justina Mukoko here, who is the National Director for Zimbabwe Peace Project, to lead us to reflect on this important question. And as we get into the elections, apathy, the way that we are experiencing apathy, Justina, and this report and the main report unpacks it into two. There is apathy that emerges from fear, which is usually because of the violence, the intimidation, and the perpetual state of insecurity, whether it's economic insecurity or physical insecurity that Tafadzwa has spoken to, and that touches our rural areas, marginalized communities. But there's also apathy that comes from mistrust of democratic institutions, and apathy that comes from despair and lack of hope, and that mainly touches the urbanites. And when we look at these two, in terms of their impact on the upcoming elections. I want to invite you, Justina. Your organization is documenting human rights violations across the country, and I've got two questions. Is fear a real thing, keeping people away from exercising their human rights? And how can we confront it?
Thank you very much, Zikamai, for inviting me, and congratulations on the launch of the report. I want to begin from a position where in a lot of communities, we are seeing barriers being moved. We might not see it as a big thing at the moment, but I think it also demonstrates that communities are keen to remove the fear that has characterized them, especially in the run-up to elections. I want to speak about the audios and videos that we have been able to get from communities who have been able to record even when they have been threatened. So at the highest of risk, they have been able to use phones at times where you can't even see who is there, but the message is coming out. And for me, that's confidence and also the courage for communities to be able and also recognizing their responsibility that they need to get these messages out have really helped us to ensure that we are able to respond what is happening to communities and also recognize and notice the credibility of some of the reports that we are getting from communities. So I think for me, this has been good in terms of kind of saying communities are aware of the pressure that they are under, but even under that pressure, they are really shining and ensuring that reports go out in terms of the people that are threatening them and also harassing them. And I think some of these audios for my organization, we have been able to receive them through the SPEC application and also through the hotline numbers that are available to communities. And I can actually confirm that most citizens are afraid when we are looking at the issue of fear and the special event that we have tomorrow. I think this is when I get really sad, because we might find, because of the obtaining fear, that some people might not want to find themselves near a polling station. I'm saying so because there's been a lot that has gone on. In the audios and videos that I'm talking about, I think people will agree with me that the thread that has gone through a lot of these videos and audios is that people have been threatened with death if a certain individual does not win. I actually remember one that says the person who was talking was saying that he had been asked by the leadership why they continue to lose in that particular community. And that person went to the extent of saying to those who were listening and who had been convened that if on the 24th or later after the elections, people recognize that that leader has lost again, they should actually lose themselves from that community. So this is the kind of fear that people are having to live with. If I go back to the elections in 2013, after in the post-electoral period, I remember that we had several women and a good number of children who fled violence in Mashonaland East. The majority, all of them did not have any injuries. but they were running away from the threats that had been issued. Threats that if one leader was going to lose the election, they also need to disappear from that community. I remember us engaging the then chairperson of the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, Advocate Mudenda, whose first question was, how many of them are injured? And our response was, none are injured, but all of them were afraid to remain in the community. It was after several days that they were then told that the situation had settled, where they had fled the violence and they were able to go back. So the situation that we have now is that people's names are being recorded in the communities. It's either they are being recorded by the cell chairperson or traditional leaders who have also been accomplices in all this instilling of fear in communities. People are afraid. Some of them are afraid to keep away from the polling station. They are damned if they keep away, because their name is not going to be ticked off on the list that these individuals have got. And they are also afraid to go to the polling station because they know that they are not going to express their will freely from what they have already been told. So they find themselves in a catch-22 kind of a situation. And the fact that we have the existence of the Forever Associates of Zimbabwe, Stroke Heritage Trust, and we also have other groups that have come out. This does not make it easy for people. We saw what FAS did when people were going to inspect the voters' roll. They had to inspect the voters' roll and pass through representatives of FAS. And this instilled fear in people as well. So we are really worried about some of these things. And I know Stabile is going to talk about women, but I also wanted to say this is a sad situation for young people who have already had other ideas in terms of the election, saying, but it doesn't make a difference whether I go and vote or not. So if you add the ingredient of fear, it makes it even difficult for them. And when we go and look at persons with disability, it also creates serious problems in our communities, because then what we are going to see is really exclusion in terms of people being able to express their political rights and to freely and fairly go out to polling stations for them to be able to cast their vote. I see you have come in, Zikamai, so I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Justina, for unpacking that for us. Indeed, and I think what is coming out here is that communities have already been confronting the fear in the way in which they have contributed to exposing the violence. One of the findings, Stabile, as you come in here, that is in the report, is that rural female opposition leaders face the highest personal security risk. And I think the overall issue, one of the overall issues discussed in this report is the impact of this fear on participation in democratic processes. And the report finds that there is a higher security risk when you participate as a political candidate than as an ordinary voter. But this particular finding, number 8, goes on to highlight the situation of rural female candidates being at a higher risk. What are your reflections there? Your organization has worked with women trying to strengthen their capacity to participate in democratic processes. Please come through, Stabile.
Thank you, Zikamai, and thank you for launching the report at an opportune time where we are headed for elections tomorrow, and cases of human rights violations are increasing by each day. I would want to validate your findings, all of them, but zero in on the one regarding women political participation. I think evidence is there from the results of the nomination court on the number of women who have managed to make it on the ballot paper, which is a far cry from what is expected from the Constitution when it comes to issues of gender equality. And one of the major reasons why we continue to record lower numbers of women participation in leadership position is the issue of political violence in its various forms, from the overt and covert violence. There are indications that are coming from regional and international observers and some of the media houses that this election is relatively peaceful. There are very few incidences of political violence, but I would want to argue that we don't necessarily have to see dead bodies on the streets. We don't necessarily have to see people who have open wounds, but the covert nature of the violations that take place in Zimbabwe sometimes are difficult to pinpoint, and it is actually the most dangerous when it comes to people's enjoyment of freedom of association and assembly. We don't need to have people paying the ultimate price for choosing to exercise their democratic rights of standing for leadership and choosing leaders of choice. What has been happening over the years is the issue of harvest of fear, especially in rural areas, where incidences that happened since Gokurahundi 2008, 2018 are continuously rubbed on communities that if you don't vote correctly, if you stand up and want to contest men, you will be victimized, you'll be raped, you'll be assaulted, you'll be forced to leave the communities. If you check right now, civil society organizations, most of us were accredited to do civic and voter education last week, which is actually far too late into the election. If you check the voter education that ZEC does, it's more on the administrative, carry your ID, the polling station will be located where, but no effort has been made by ZEC to demystify the myth that there will be drones, that there will be cameras within the booth. And it is quite sad that the violence is actually being extended even to churches. I got incidences this morning that there were congregates that were threatened, female congregates, that if you do not vote for a certain political party, you will not go to heaven. That's another form of violence against women. And one of the other challenges is no one is defenders themselves. Our also under the continuous surveillance, continuous profiling in state media exposes us to victimization and also threatens our personal security. I want also to confirm that no one is ready to die for casting their vote on someone that they prefer is better equipped to represent them. And no one must die for exercising their constitutional rights. And we need to continue hammering on those factors. I think you have seen flyers that have been circulating on social media from Midlands in Gokwe, where voters are actually being threatened that if you exercise your rights the other way, we will definitely deal with you. And so imagine a woman from a rural area who has the capacity to lead, but is surrounded by patriarchy, is surrounded by vultures who actually want to crush if she chooses to run for public office. So there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of raising awareness on the importance of allowing women to stand up for leadership. The statistics that we have right now of 11% women in parliament and less than 14% for council are going to decrease after tomorrow, as some of these women have won in constituencies where their political parties do not usually win in all the elections. So our figures are going to be lower, and we need a collective approach to the issue of political violence from different stakeholders, starting with political parties, because even their internal processes that they do to choose candidates are also exposing women to violence. I also want to speak on issues of online violence against women, which is also rampant right now as we get into elections. Imagine a woman, some of them are married, are exposed, you're a prostitute, you've slept with this person, body shaming. Who would want them to stand for public office in a situation like that? So as long as your personal security is not guaranteed, no one would want to run for public office, and that explains the lower numbers of women that we have. I also want to touch on the issue of the women who are arrested. Right now, there are 24 women from Harare who are arrested, 22 for just carrying out a car rally, and the other 2 from Seke who are also candidates. So who would want to run for public office in 2028 when they know that if you stand for office, you would definitely be arrested? Of the 22 from Glenview, there is one couple who left 2 children, one 10-year-old and 5-year-old alone at home. So who would want them in the future to sacrifice the security and welfare of their kids by exposing themselves to arbitrary arrest, intimidation, and forced migration? And lastly, I'm a bit worried by the information that is circulating on social media that COVID regulations, the restrictions will be imposed on this election. During the by-elections, we saw people who were stationed at polling station writing down names of people as they were getting into polling stations. Just any form of writing down of names is enough to threaten people. So you don't necessarily have to see people being beaten, people being raped or tortured, but just the harvest of fear is enough to threaten. And I also, as I conclude, just want to thank Zimbabweans who have turned themselves into citizen journalism, like what Sister Justina was highlighting. We are receiving information near real time. Gone are the days where there will be too much propaganda, information being cooked up, and people end up being threatened and also being given false allegations. We are getting information from the remote of the remotest areas, which shows that people are sick and tired of the intimidation and peace. And as we vote tomorrow as well, we just want to emphasize that Zimbabweans, let's go out in our numbers and vote in peace. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Tawele, for highlighting that. And I think you link very closely when you speak about the harvest of fear. You link very closely to real case studies that are captured in the report, particularly the State of Peace report, about the real cases of violence. You know, you spoke about the Glenview 22. The report refers to More Blessing Ali, the situation of Job Sikala, and how these then play out in the media, and how it actually looks like the security establishment wants these pictures and these images out there in the open, so that they, like what Mugabe would say, strike fear into the hearts of the voters. I want to come to you, Justina. We wanted this session to be short and sweet, so I want us to get to the close. But if you have got any questions that you have about this report, please feel free to raise your hand and we will bring you in, or you can just communicate in the chat there. Dr. Ed Knowledge, I'm just checking if Dr. Ed Knowledge Mandikwaza is in the room. He was going to reflect on the post-election reconciliation agenda for Zimbabwe. The State of Peace report is basically looking at all this state of fragility. And now the NPRC is coming to an end, and there appears to be no plan for post-election reconciliation agenda. Yeah, but I see Dr. Mandikwaza has been kicked out of the, but I will come to you, Justina, but I want to invite, I see we have the coordinator.
He is in the room.
Yes, Comrade Mandikwaza, would you want to unmute yourself and share with us about this scenario that we are faced with? Usually elections, they create a lot of tensions. And this is the purpose of the peace architecture. And our peace architecture, what capacity does it have to deal with the kind of situation that we are facing, particularly preparing for the post-election reconciliation agenda? Acknowledge.
He is asking to be unmuted.
Colleagues in the technical, please help me identify. Acknowledge, could you switch on your video so that the team can identify you? Oh, there you are. Please proceed and share your quick reflections.
Hello, thank you, Zikamai. I hope you can hear me. It seems like I can't unmute my video.
That's fine. We can loud and clear. Please
The
proceed.
host has the right, but let me proceed. Thank you for this opportunity to speak, and thank you for the comprehensive report. I like mostly that it touches on both social and economic rights and also civil and political rights. It digs deep how fear transcends beyond the politics of the day into the people's livelihoods. Generally, as we look at the moment, the capacity of our institutions to address fear are not there at all. Fear and insecurity itself, you can tell that it has a connection to the past. It is a result of, or it is influenced by past experiences. You would find that given the context where we are at the moment, most people have become zombies. They do not know how to behave. The consent to political position and their decision to vote for A or B, it is being influenced by fear. But that fear has been created by past experiences. You can take it from the liberation struggle, the Gugura Hundi, or post-liberation struggle experience. You can take it from the different episodes of elections that we've had. Most people have had their dignity taken away simply because they decide based on the fear that the trauma that has been inserted in them. So what it makes is, it makes it difficult for us to build a sustainable peace in the long term. I see your report is much more connected to building sustainable peace in the long term for democratic consolidation. But this becomes more difficult because the key issues that should be addressed that happened in the past, the gross human rights violations that took place, have not been addressed. This is why today, when political campaigns are taking place, there is maximization of a reference to the past. You can see the fear language that is used by violence entrepreneurs. For example, the way the liberation struggle memories are invoked, it's meant to actually make that fear work in the present and into the future. So if we do not address the past human rights issues, past gross human rights violence issues, we're likely to continue experiencing difficulties in ensuring that people express themselves freely and that they exercise their political choices freely. The way the land reform, Wandoye Minda, is carved, it's meant to create that fear. And even today, I'm sure Christmas mentioned it, that people are kind of like their economic values, their economic possessions, they are kind of like controlled by saying, if you do this, we don't give you that. So if we don't win, we are going to take your land. If you don't vote for us, we are not going to give you food. That fear language is highly connected from the political, but also to the social issues, to the social and economic activities that people do. You'll find today the experiences of the 2008 violence. It continues being reverberated, being reiterated by violence entrepreneurs. That makes it difficult for ordinary citizens to be able to exercise their right to vote, their right to a very specific political party they would like to associate with and that they would like to vote for. In some communities, what we are hearing is that people are being told that the 2008 will happen if you don't vote wisely. What it means is you are invoking the wounds of the past so that people remember that if they don't do what you want, then they're going to be experiencing violence. Some are being told that if you don't vote wisely in the first leg, the second leg, the rerun, it simply means rerun means rufuru rikuya in our Shona vernacular language. So it means it's actually maximizing on the past experiences. Hence the need for transitional justice to actually take place, which is unfortunate that the NPRC has failed to address that. It's only when people are able to have a guarantee of non-recurrence that they will be able to then move forward and be able to exercise their civil and political rights peacefully, and that they will be able to also enjoy their social and economic rights peacefully without undue influence and without any fear of some sort. So non-recurrence to me as a transitional justice mechanism is what is central to redress of fear going forward. If there are institutional reforms as your report recommends, then it means institutional reforms will be able to dismantle the tools of violence and conflict. I'm sure at the moment you would see that the institutions that we have, they have not changed. Some political analysts and commentators have continuously argued that the structures that we had during the colonial regime, they seem to have continued into the post-colonial era. And those institutions, unless and until they have transformed, they have been reformed, then we will be able to address the fear that has been taking place in the past and that has been carried over time and again. And even the references of the liberation struggle, the Ondeminda, the deprivation of our economic rights will then move away, and people will then be able to exercise all the rights that are established in the Constitution without any fear. You can think of healing and reconciliation processes. People who were traumatized, starting from the liberation struggle itself, when we had the colonial regime, perpetrating violence against the blacks, and coming to the post-colonial period, when we had all this experience of electoral violence. It cannot happen. It cannot happen. Fear will continue to exist. Healing and reconciliation process can address that, but it only happens if fear has been actually taken into consideration. The NPRC has failed to restore that public confidence, which ensures that when there's healing and reconciliation, then people can believe that there is good trust, there is a possibility to make a way forward and to exercise our rights peacefully. You can think of justice and accountability in itself. When those who caused the violence and conflict, the perpetrators of gross human rights violations, have not been held to account, it is going to make it difficult for the public to actually have confidence, to actually have trust. It is trust that comes with the redress of fear. In the context where we're having at the moment, Section 210, it provides for the establishment of the Independent Complaints Commission. In cases where there are violations that have been perpetrated by members of the security forces. But as it stands at the moment, you do not see how the Independent Complaints Commission is actually working. Its presence is not felt, although the law has been put in place. What it means is all the cases that we are receiving at the moment of gross human rights violations that are already taking place, they cannot be addressed. And people cannot then move out to exercise their civil and political rights because they're afraid that there isn't an institution that has been put in place that will address their grievances. Reparations, I'm sure we have had lots of discussions and conversations around the need for reparations for those who have suffered in many different ways. But if they haven't been done, and if the institutions that were put in place have not been able to address that, it also means that public confidence cannot be restored. Now, it is also important that we consider fear existing among those who are in the corridors of power. they are fearful, they are afraid, and this is why they are perpetrating violence and making sure that the cycles of fear are continuing. What it means is, in our programming and thinking, we must be able to consider transformative justice as an approach that helps cultivate political will, so that we also help dissipate the fears of those who are actually clinging onto power and creating cycles of violence and conflict. Once we are able to address that, once we are able to cultivate that political will, it can actually contribute towards promoting sustainable peace, the building of effective institutions that enables people are able to live in peace and harmony. But also, like what Justina has mentioned, she reiterated that people have keenness in removing the barriers that are existing. What it means is there's some resistance, some resilience that is existing. So we must be able to build resilience among our own citizens. And the most softest way is to ensure that disinformation and misinformation amongst citizens is actually done. That alone, it enables. I think you can attest, Stabile has mentioned how ZEC is failing to clear the air about COVID-19 masks being required. That alone, it can help build resilience. It can help someone to step out of the door and go to vote. Dialogue, you have mentioned, Christmas mentioned about dialogue as a tool that can also be very important. I think it's one of those things that we have failed to cultivate for a long time. Dialogue enables people to clear the air in terms of various measures that could be creating this continuous fear systems and institutions. And lastly, I think a victim-centered approach, we should be able to restore confidence and stand with those who have been victimized to ensure that they will also be able to become resilient, recover from the trauma that they experienced, and that they will be able to exercise their freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mandikwaza. Yeah, I want to now open, we promised to make this short and sweet, but I would not have done justice to close this meeting without hearing from the audience. But you raised something, so please feel free to raise your hand if you want to make a comment or to ask a question. But Dr. Mandikwaza, you shift this issue of fear to the other side. Corridors of power. So the fear that you are speaking about, the fear that we are speaking about is not only the electorate being afraid and skipping away from the ballot altogether or going to vote contrary to their will as instructed by the traditional leader. But you also say the reason why those in power release violence is because they are afraid of losing power. Somebody said democracy manifests itself in the willingness to let go of power. And once our leaders see themselves powerless, they are gripped with so much fear. As a result, it creates a problem. I see the Fortune there. Fortune's hand is up. He's the coordinator for the National Transitional Justice Working Group. How do we deal with that question? Fortune, if you have any question, please proceed. So I will ask Fortune. I see Fortune. I see Pelagia, and I think I see Tatenda. I will take those three questions. Fortune, please unmute yourself and come.
Thank you, Zigama. It's not really a question, but I thought I would also buttress the issues that have been discussed here by the panelists, if you may allow me. From where I'm standing, our problems in terms of post-election reconciliation are really a zero-cost activity. These are things that only require the will to deal with. We have all seen how the NPRC was an expensive experiment, which has not brought the desired results and the effects that we thought it would. And it also goes back to the issue of the lack of political will to deal with the issues that are very important. We are already starting to have new transitional justice and reconciliation issues coming out as we are facing this election. And of course, the question that we all ask ourselves is the issue of transition of power. And Zigama have rightly pointed out that democracy is measured by the willingness to forgo the power. And if the election is to go the other way, are we not likely to have a position in which the transition of power is not going to happen? And what's then going to happen to our already fragile nation? Definitely it will spiral into a failed state. I want to spotlight one thing before I let the mic go. The recent utterances that were said by the Minister of Home Affairs, which is reminiscent of what happened in August 2018, 1 August 2018. He is on record saying that the military and the police are ready to deal with malcontents. It was a very strongly and charged and heavily worded statement, which should always we should always look at, because we have seen the precedence of such statements and hate language, and the effect was the death of 6 people. That's something of concern to us as peace practitioners, and it's an issue where we should also look at in terms of how do we reconstruct the nation after the elections. The issue of the fear, the entrenched fear that we're talking about. We have made fear a daily meal. Everyone in Zimbabwe benefits from inflicting fear in the next person or not. You hear someone saying, if you don't give me the money, I have my cousin at the CIO, he will deal with you. And it has become a way of life for us to use violence to deal with issues and social issues. That's all I wanted to just add, the issue of looking towards how some of these utterances are likely going to cause problems in the post-election period. Thank you, Tsikamai.
Thank you, Fortune. We have made fear our daily bread, so you say, and you spotlight again that issue of hate speech. I think over this election period, we have recorded over 500 incidences of hate speech, and much of them in accordance to what you are saying. These are words, statements meant to cause fear, but spoken by those even more fearful of life without political authority. Pelagia, please come through.
Yes, thank you very much, Zikamai, and congratulations to Zimrights on the launch of this report. I just wanted to validate finding number 2, which talks about women being subject to higher personal risk than men, and just say that, political violence, for example, breeds or begets gender-based violence. And case in point being the August 1 occurrences. And when you see situations like that, where women then get sexually abused and raped, you then also see that in such kind of environment where there is political violence, access to reproductive health care also becomes limited. So indeed, that is one point that I just wanted to buttress in terms of the recommendation, and then just say that, the points that Star indicated in her presentation, and also some of the points that Justina talked about, they really validate that finding. And my consolation is that there are institutions and women, strong women like the ones that are on the panel right now, who are there to play watchdog and also to come in and save the day. But it's not enough. And I think from the recommendations that Tafadzwa indicated when he made his presentation, to say that as a collective, we need to come together and really look back and step back and say, what else do we need to do? But thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much, Pelagia. Yeah, I think you raise a very important issue. Political violence begets gender-based violence. Spotlighting finding number 2, women are subject to higher personal risk than men. Priska Due, please come through.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations, Zimrights, on the report. I actually want to buttress on what Pelagia has just said. For me, you find that the issue of bodily autonomy and bodily integrity of women, and us as a country not emphasizing on those as human rights, continues to perpetuate violence on women because women are socialized in such a manner that their bodies do not necessarily belong to them. They belong to the family that they are born into and the family that they then assumed they will marry into. Therefore, they do not have those bodily autonomy, bodily integrity things being something that they grow up with. So it is easy for women's bodies then to be violated. Hence, they then have a high cost should they want to participate in political arenas. And those that want to maintain power in the political arena will use women's bodies to ensure that they remain in power. That's point number one. Point number two, for me, I'm loving all the 10 recommendations, but I wanted us to also possibly start to have a conversation in terms of transgenerational trauma and fear. Because we know science has shown us that if women that are pregnant drink alcohol or breastfeed whilst they're drinking alcohol, it is transmitted to children. Invariably, fear also is transmitted from one generation to the next. So we need to start to have this conversation on how do we deal with transgenerational fear and fear mongering as a current. Not only are we having sextortion, now we are having also fear mongering as a current over and above the actual currents that we have as a country. So thank you for the interesting conversations. I hope we'll continue to have such dialogues.
Thank you very much, Priska. You highlighted how do we break the fear across the generations? We have gone through almost a century. I think some time ago, Rao launched a report on the short history of organized violence and torture in Zimbabwe, looking at almost an entire century of the use of torture as a tool for political gain, and that has created fear across the generations. And how do we break that? Thank you very much, Priska. We now want to come to the close, so I want to go back to my panelists for their final words, beginning with Tafadzwa, who is the lead researcher in this policy brief. Tafadzwa, we have had a conversation, and there has been a shift in terms of the fear perspectives. That this fear is not only in those electorate who are forced to make a choice that is not theirs, or to keep away from the ballot because they feel they have no voice, but also that even the politicians who unleash violence are themselves acting out of fear. Fortune mentioned that we don't have an operational transfer of power mechanism in our current constitution. It's actually difficult to begin to imagine any constitutional institution coming on national television, sort of a coup announcing a transfer of power. What are your quick reflections on that?
Thank you, Zigamai. I think my immediate reaction when I was listening to the conversation was, this is exactly why we need to build a society that is built around the rule of law and civic trust. I think I added this particular aspect when I was making the initial presentation of the findings we made to this report, to say one of the key weaknesses that we have in our country that stops citizens from enjoying their personal security is the absence of the state, or the state capture, where the state is non-existent, virtually non-existent. It has been supplanted by the party. So such a trajectory is one of the reasons why those in power don't feel safe to be in any other version of Zimbabwe where they're not in power, because they've never experienced a state before. They've never experienced a government which guarantees equal protection of the law for all citizens. What they've experienced before is a pseudo government that really reflects partisan interests, partisan application of the law, selective application of the law. And once you have such a kind of a system, you realize that power in Zimbabwe means being able to control all those facets of government. It means controlling. I think in one of the speeches we have our president, I think, saying that we are the police, we are the army, we are the judiciary. That kind of thinking is the reason why those that are in power, if they fear the idea of having any other version of Zimbabwe where they're not in power, because they've never experienced a state. A state is supposed to be one. That's why I realized, I think it's one of the points that we added in the report, to say that as civil society, it's important for us to talk about having human rights and all these other improvements. But one of the critical fundamental issues we need to highlight is, no matter who wins this election, no matter who comes into government, they must transition from partisan politics into becoming a state. They must go into state building. We want a government. We want a government for everyone. We want a government that is able to guarantee the rule of law. The government that is able to guarantee that if I am assaulted by someone who supports the political party that is in power, that particular individual would be arrested and will be prosecuted. But the current situation we have is that having a membership for the ruling party is a get out of jail card. It is one of the, you can perpetrate all sorts of violations with impunity. So that is the reason why those that are in power are fearful. Zikama, if you allow me, I just want to say two quick things before I leave the floor. I will not be happy if I leave without saying these things because they are critical. One aspect I wanted to highlight is this. One of the findings we find from the report was that we saw a correlation between these factors. If you go to the map of Zimbabwe and try to map out so-called ruling party strongholds, the areas where the ruling party has always won and has always established dominance, there's a correlation between those strongholds and the areas where you find sites of political violence. These are the places where you have instances of political violence, but also these are the same areas where you will find heightened cases of food insecurity and multidimensional poverty. So our interpretation is, if you look at all those three factors, is that in as much as we would want to demonize, I think there's this rift, this gap between the urbanites and those in those strongholds, where we have considered as civil society as well as citizens, where we say these areas don't belong to democratic thinking Zimbabweans. These are either illiterates, or these are backward people, or these are people who are just really fervent about the ruling party. But we have never really gone in to look to say, are we not ignoring people who are being victimized? Are we not ignoring people who are facing a heightened state of personal insecurity that we should, as civil society and as the rest of citizens, be arguing to say, ensure that the people in these areas are protected, they have enough food. Let's address the partisan distribution of food in these areas. Let's address the issue of land in these areas. Who's giving land to these people? Who has control over the land? Let's ensure those people in those areas enjoy personal security. And then is only where we can be able to say they are expressing their own political choice. And my last comment before I leave is this. I just want to read this statement, Zikamai, because I think it's critical to capture everything that you have said, as well as what Ed Knowledge said. In addition to the hate speech that we are tracking, there's something that we need to decode going forward. And the thing that we need to decode is this. When former aggressors who still hold the instruments of violence advocate for peace by referencing to the devastating effects of past violence, which they themselves instigated or perpetrated, such appeals for peace are in actual fact veiled threats. So let's not ignore this. So whenever they say, vote for us if you want peace, what they're actually saying is a threat. They're actually telling you, you saw what happened when you went against us and you know what happened. It's devastating for the community. So we should not lose those and just highlight the clear hate speech and threats. But let's also take note of those references. I think Ed Knowledge highlighted this particular issue to say it has to do, you cannot disconnect the present from the past. The people know what happened in the past. They know that people who perpetrated violence enjoy impunity to this day. They live in the communities. They are there enjoying impunity as we go forward. So whenever the politicians come out and say, we want peace, vote for us and vote for peace, what they are simply saying to the communities is, you know, we hold the power, we hold the instruments for violence. If you don't vote for us, we are going to unleash the instruments of violence upon you. Those are the two remarks I just wanted to highlight. I hope I answered your question. I tended to be biased because I had some issues which I wanted to highlight.
Very powerful, very powerful. When past aggressors refer to past incidences of violence which they themselves have perpetrated, pretending to be preaching for peace, it is actually violence. It is actually violence. Thank you very much, Tafazwa, for that very powerful ending. I will invite Justina. Justina, if you are in. Justina is the National Director for Zimbabwe Peace Project, an organization that has led in exposing violence. But Justina, I want you to take off your official mantra as a director and speak as a citizen. You have been through quite a lot, and many citizens are going through quite a lot. How did you confront that fear to still continue to do the work that you do and to participate in a way that you participate, something that our communities can listen to and say, we believe we actually have got the power to confront and challenge this fear.
Thank you very much, Tsekamai. I think in terms of facing the fear that I faced a few years ago, I needed to rise up and let my fellow citizens recognize that they are not alone. I needed to rise up to demonstrate to my fellow citizens that there can be transformation from victimhood to being a survivor. And I know that in other communities, people were being told, if we could do this to Justina Mkoko, imagine what we could do to you. And I think it was necessary for me to continue to be seen, to work with victims of human rights abuses. And I think just being able to stand up like that and continue to do my work, because I think I have several people who would meet me on the street and ask, are you still at ZPP? Yes, I'm still at ZPP. It just didn't make sense to them that they were hearing that I was a terrorist, that I was wanting to overthrow a constitutionally elected government, and how I continued to do all this. But I think continuing to do this work has inspired a whole lot of people. And now I recognize that there is a group of people who do not give up easily. They will keep on holding to what they believe in. So I think citizens need to understand that there is a time for everything. And I think we need to be able, that transformation is important. And I think when I started speaking earlier on, I spoke about how I am fascinated by people who have been speaking out about what they have been subjected to in their communities at high risk to themselves and their families. And I also want to say, in line with what Tafadzwa has said, we continually hear some people in one political party saying that we brought the human rights. And I think this is in line with what he was talking about, that it is these architects of the violations who then come out as if they are going to save society. And the issue around fear in the corridors of power, I think the story around Passenger 34 explains everything, that if you contribute to building those barriers, you might also be forced to go through the same. Thank you, Tsekamai.
Very powerful. Thank you very much, Justina, and that is very encouraging. I want to come to you, Dr. Acknowledge. What are your last reflections? We are confronted with a tense, potentially post-election, election and post-election situation without a working peace architecture. What are your last reflections? Dr. Acknowledge, would you want to unmute yourself? Has he stepped out? Or he's still in?
All right, thank you, Tsekamai. It seems the host always had the right to unmute me. I think the key words, the last key message that I have for the listeners and also to the general public is that there is need to build resilience among our own people. the instruments of violence that the state is using and violent entrepreneurs seem not to be going to end soon, unless if we build resilience, but also if we fight to build and cultivate political will that addresses fear on both ends. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Knowledge. And let me take this opportunity as we bring this meeting to an end to thank our panelists who have, I think, helped us unpack this report. In the various presentations, we were, of course, trespassing into the main report, the 2022 State of Peace report, which we will be releasing on the 21st of September. But this policy brief does give us an opportunity to extract key issues that come from that report to help us understand and appreciate the context in which the 2023 election is being held. We would like also to take this opportunity to let you know that Zimrights has been working with different communities at different stages, encouraging participation. And if you visit our website, you'll be able to see a number of resources that are important to assist our communities so that they're able to participate in democratic processes effectively. We've got the Elections and Democracy Manual that helps, that provides guidance in terms of building a culture of effective participation in election and democratic processes. We also have got the Knowledge for Action Manual, which is basically a manual that helps in terms of civic engagement on human rights in Zimbabwe. We also have got the People's Human Rights Manifesto, which helps have a human rights-centered dialogue with those who aspire for political office and allow us to rate them and their participation for their time that they are in office. And we also have the Rights and Traditions, which is an important resource that looks at traditional leadership, politics, and human rights. We have had a number of political leaders that have made effective use of this manual at a time when they were asked to take a partisan stand when it comes to elections and to bus people and give them instructions on how to vote. And finally, today we did launch the Facing the Fear, Confronting Threats to Personal Security and Peace in Zimbabwe, which is, again, is an important resource to help us understand one of the key obstacles to participation and how we can confront it. Many more resources are available on our website. So allow me, on behalf of the Zimrights team, to thank you all for being part of this conversation. I wish you all happy voting for those who are registered to vote. Those who are not registered to vote or those who are not qualified to vote, please encourage those who are qualified to vote. Remember those who are disabled, the elderly who are unable to help their way to the polling station, please offer a helping hand. We will be closed as Zimrights tomorrow because it's a holiday, but our hotlines are on and we have our teams on the ground. Please enjoy the rest of your day and have a peaceful election day.
Sorry, Tsikamai, before you finish, there is a question in the chat from Sarah.
Yes. A question from Sarah in the chat. Is this the first time we have seen these ballots with double candidates, not factions, but both candidates labeled as official political party candidates? Does anyone want to respond to that? Justina, would you have a response to that question?
Sarah, this is not the first time. I think we continue to see these disagreements in the political parties, and it's not just the opposition. I think we have seen that growing in the ruling party as well in the past, and in the current election. There are some people who were disgruntled after the primary elections who have also gone on to register as independent candidates. So this continues to be a problem that we face every time that we get to election. And I would say probably this is fueled by the fact that a lot of people see getting into public office as an opportunity to be closer to the cookie jar.
Thanks, Justina. Very well put. I was just curious. I didn't remember the ballots having like two copies of the same logo. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Great session.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Colleagues, we have come to the end of this session. Watch out for more products from Zimrights. And as I said, have a very peaceful election day. Enjoy the rest of your day.